When I was younger, I used to think that being a Catholic was just that, just kind of being a Catholic. I didn't really think too much in terms of following Jesus. Being Catholic meant, in my little mind, basically saying prayers that I was taught by my mother, going to Mass because I had to, avoiding being a bad person, which basically was what my mother told me not to do, and my dad. They always backed each other up. My parents were never divided on an issue of discipline, which I don't remember a lot of things, but I remember that. And then it was also trying to not only avoid the bad, but trying to do the right things as well. In other words, it was more do's and don'ts. It was kind of a series of do's and don'ts, what I was just supposed to do and what I wasn't supposed to do, all the don'ts. As I got a little older and entered the seminary at 22, I realized that being a Catholic was good and important, but it was way too high level. In other words, it was too generic, just being a Catholic. It wasn't specific enough. It was really about following Jesus Christ, but the realization that following him requires more than simply adhering to rules, although it does involve that, but it's really more about following a person. It's not about checking religious boxes, but it's about friendship with Christ. It's a completely different mindset, and it will lead to different actions, depending on how we engage or encounter this person, Jesus. Part of this following Jesus involves a struggle with understanding both the need and the reason for sacrifices. That is, giving up things that weren't necessarily bad, but that if I didn't sacrifice them, it would be very difficult for me to live in a relationship with him. Again, as a young person, it was more or less do's and don'ts. And it was kind of like, although I didn't use this terminology, it was checking boxes. A lot of this had to do with not fully identifying myself as a disciple of Christ, and therefore understanding the importance of being all in, being 100% to follow him. As a result, I didn't make a lot of sacrifices, or I made them perhaps half-heartedly. I made them because they were just part of the Catholic, kind of an atmosphere of the family. My dad wasn't Catholic, but my mom was, and my dad supported my mom. So, for example, we had no meat on Friday. And you were allowed to do the substitute, but we had no meat on Friday. Now, eating fish was just because fish was on the table. It wasn't because I made the intention of not eating meat. And again, this may be fine when you're a child and growing up in a family, but there comes a point when we have to start thinking intentionally about what am I going to do, all right? Now, thinking that way is helped by the fact that my mother didn't have fish or didn't have meat on the table on Friday. Then I have to learn why that is important in order for me to carry that into my adulthood and then make it my own and realize it's not just a bunch of don'ts, it's actually something to help me do something. It's a huge transformation or mindset. I did go through a change of heart, what you might call a conversion experience. I began to realize that these sacrifices were not burdens. Even going to Mass on Sunday was a joy. But I wasn't always there. These were wise decisions that kept me on the pathway of following Jesus Christ. And it wasn't about rules so much as it was about making choices that helped me along the path of wisdom, to helping me to be truly wise. Even though I may not have framed it in that way, I'm looking back on it and saying these were choices that actually helped me to be wise. We all know what it feels to kind of face this tension of knowing that we're supposed to do certain things and avoid certain things, and what's the reason for doing this? Because it's important that we have a reason for this. At one point in our life, it's enough to know just don't do it, authority. But as we get older, it's important that we inform authority and actually see the reason it's good for us. This is wisdom. And it changes the way we approach these or encounter these situations in our life. In the gospel of the day, Jesus gives a teaching that challenges us to be willing to make sacrifices for him, but I would contend even also for our own good. In other words, there's a personal gain to this aside from our relationship with him. He says, if your hand causes you to stumble, then cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than two hands and go to hell. And we know, as I'll mention in a moment, this is not to be taken in a crude, literal way. However, Jesus is conveying to us the grave nature of sin. And he, in effect, is saying that if you go to heaven and you have one eye and one hand because you lost it, then it's better to go into heaven with one eye and one hand, although you get them back, than to go to hell with both hands and both eyes. Because what's a profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses everything? It's eternal damnation. So he is making a literal point about the grave nature of sin. But as I said, he doesn't want us to maim ourselves. What he is telling us is that sin is grave. It's serious. This is something that, because he goes on and on about this, right? To read the gospel over and over again, he goes through all the appendages. Not all of them, but most of them, right? Hands, eyes, doesn't say ears, but, feet and so on. So what he's telling us is that sin is serious. And avoiding sin sometimes requires serious action, sacrifices. He's emphasizing that we need to make hard decisions, even sacrifices to avoid falling into temptation. This isn't about burdening our lives with extra rules or restrictions, but it's really about being wise. And wisdom, the definition of wisdom, is not like Solomon's. Maybe Solomon accumulated knowledge can make one wise, but can also make one arrogant. So it's not accumulated knowledge, but rather wisdom, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, states that the gift of wisdom enables a person to see from God's perspective, guiding them to live in harmony with the divine truths. This is what true wisdom is. So it enables them to live in harmony with the divine truths. It's really about doing whatever it takes, to put it into modern lingo, whatever it takes to stay close to Jesus and avoid the things that pull us away from him. In order to do this, we need to make sacrifices. Basically because they dispose us to God's grace. Now, Jesus isn't saying this to make life harder. He's saying this to protect us and to lead us so that we can be led to true life. I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. This doesn't mean the life that is 24/7 on the beach, like a holiday, or a life of ease and comfort, but rather the life of virtue, which involves a strength of character, so that we have true mastery over ourselves. The sacrifices we make, when we get to this point, we see them, they are not burdens. They are wise choices that help us to live the life that God truly desires for us. So what does this mean for you and me? Maybe there are areas in your life where you've been resisting making a sacrifice, thinking that it perhaps is too restrictive, it's going to limit your freedom, inhibit your capacity to really enjoy life and so on, and perhaps it's even unnecessary. But Jesus is asking us to look deeper than this, to examine our intentions, our motivations, because they will ultimately lead us to do what we do, good or bad. What's at stake isn't just about following rules. It's really about our hearts. It's about choosing to walk in wisdom, not putting ourselves in situations where we could easily stumble, meaning sin. Two examples of the importance of sacrifice in the temporal order or in our physical life. One is from Roger Federer. Somebody sent me a video this past week. It's a great speech that Roger Federer gave to the graduating students of Dartmouth a couple years ago. And one of the things he mentions, the first point he conveys to them, he says, you must understand the myth of the effortless. The myth of the effortless. People look at me, he said, when I was at the top of my game. Oh, I would love to play tennis like Roger Federer. Really? Sit down with Roger and hear what Unbelievable discipline he subjected himself to. What rules, what guidelines, going to bed at the right time, getting up at the right time, going to practice, submitting to coaches. Then nobody gets to that level with one coach. Many coaches, and then coaches over the years. Diet. You got to be there on time and striving to overcome fatigue. Stop whining if you really want to be good. He said if people really knew what I submitted myself to be where I was, they would realize the effortless is a myth. So anything we want in life, even if it's not being as successful as Roger Federer, if we think that we can have that without effort or sacrifice, we are deluding ourselves. You don't have to be a priest or a Christian to know that. Just Roger Federer, I don't think he's a Christian. Anybody in the physical order understands this, who really wants to excel and do well at what they are striving for. The other example is what I used last week from John Wooden, this great coach of the UCLA Bruins, who won 10 NCAA championships in 12 years. It's actually in 12 years. Still, it hasn't been repeated. But John Wooden would not allow his players to think about winning because it would blind them. What he had them focus on is showing up at practice and at games with a 10 attitude. I'm putting it in my words, but it's his idea, a 10 attitude. Now, this 10 attitude requires enormous sacrifice because, again, his athletes could not show up and give a 10 at practice if they weren't going to bed at the right time, getting up at the right time, not partying like crazy people on Friday and Saturday night, and on and on and on. And he was also very insistent they do well in school because he knew that basketball goes, it fades with time, but their studies would carry them through and open doors in the future. So it requires a lot of sacrifice. And still to this day, when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's one of the great athletes in the NBA, talks about John Wooden, he never says John Wooden, coach. It's always coach. It's like father. The level of respect this man had for John, and all the players do that. Bill, I can't think of his name. Anyways, they all referred to him as coach. This needed sacrifice in our life could really be, maybe it's not about wanting to be the best in basketball, but it could be about the media that we consume. Sacrifices are necessary to get things in control. Not only time-wise, but the content. People you spend time with. Maybe it's too much, maybe it's the wrong person. Person who's not adding value to your life or not really helping you to be good, but is actually leading you to waste a lot of time or to, in fact, lead you down the path of sin. It's not always sexual sin here. It could be gossip and malicious, conversations about other people, or the environments we find ourselves in. Making time, is it making time to pray? I have no time. This is a lie. Everybody has time. It's a matter of priorities, priority management, going to bed at the right time and all this stuff. So maybe these are the things we struggle with, the sacrifices that we know we need to make in order for some of these things to go and some of these things to happen. We are made for friendship. It is not good that the man be alone. Therefore, God not only creates the man, but he creates the woman. So we're made for friendship, but if a human friendship, Jesus says, is leading us away from him, then we need to correct it or eject it. We need to correct it. Hopefully that works. But if not, we need to eject it. Like, where do we want to go? What do we want to achieve? What's our end goal? Whatever it is, Jesus is inviting us to make wise choices that help us avoid sin and stay close to him. And in fact, will bring about a flourishing of our own life. Imagine what it would look like if we as a community made these kinds of wise sacrifices. Not because we're weighed down by rules and obligations, but because we're committed to following Jesus wholeheartedly. Because we've actually come to a point in our life when we realize it's not about rules, it's about love. It's about love. I really do love him. And I don't love him the way I should, but I want to really love him. And sometimes we need course correction because we can heap too many things on our life. We can become obsessive about things, or we think following Christ is about heaping up all sorts of devotions and so on. So we can miss the mark and we need some correction. But the essential idea is correct. Love eliminates so many of the things we look at as rules and odious, burdensome, and so on. We'd be a people who choose sacrifice not because we have to, but because we see the value in walking closely with God. This week, I really encourage you to take some time, carve it out, even 15, 20 minutes. Take some time to evaluate your life. Where might God be calling you to make a sacrifice? Not a burden, not as a burden, but as a wise choice to not only avoid temptation, it might be, or to grow in your relationship with Him, which will help you to stay close to Him. Maybe, as I said, it's in an area of entertainment choices, or the way you spend your time, or a friendship that is not healthy for you. Whatever it is, remember that these sacrifices are not about limiting our freedom, your freedom. Rather, they're helping us to walk in wisdom, staying close to Christ. And you and I will flourish.